In this episode of Inside Art of Fishing, with creature baits becoming so popular for bass these days, I've got my good friend Danny Parkins, who's going to take me out and show me exactly how it's done. Something he's done a lot of and something I've done very little, so hopefully me learning along the way will teach you guys a thing or two as well. Danny, we've come down to the estuary today for a little bit of, for me to have a little go with these creature baits you've been fishing a lot of late.
Yeah.
I know they've been a very trendy thing. I've heard a lot about them over the last
Definitely hot topic. Definitely hot topic.
How did you get into it? I know you've been doing it for a while, longer than most, so how did it start?
Yeah, so we, kind of a bit of a funny backstory to this. So we basically, me and a guy called Chris Lowe, when the dark sleeper, which is kind of the predecessor to this, became popular in Japan and online, we'd bought those. In Japan, they'd released the craw. Chris had sneaked one in thinking he was going to one-up me. I didn't realise what it was. But because at the time we weren't necessarily going out targeting this method, he had just the one sleeper craw in his box for about a year. And we didn't really get on with it. We couldn't really find a place in our fishing. It was kind of looked like it was going to be wrassy. We knew the crabs were the food of the bass down here, but we didn't really have a place for it. For a year, he tried to swap that single sleeper craw with me for every lure in my box. Every opportunity he had, he wanted to swap it. Fast forward like 2 years, it was a quiet day, they were down on the river. Chris clipped on the sleeper craw and we were like bottom contacting, skull dragging the bottom for bass, and voila, ended up having an absolute blinder of a session on craws. Ended up fishing the session out, him and a mate. They ended up driving all the way up country because of the nearest shop that sold them, and he only had the one to buy more so they could catch the tail end of the tide later on. And ever since then, it was that much of a light switch that we've just moved on. And I mean, bottom contact method, whether it be the craws, small dark paddle tails, netting, all those methods has become a real key part of my armoury and what I really, really enjoy doing. And it is deadly effective.
It's amazing. I'm excited by the fact that it's kind of rejuvenated a little bit of what we're doing, especially in our estuaries. I mean, we got to the point where we'd found a plateau in a way. We were just doing the same things. We were catching lots of fish. Lots of people were very happy doing what they're doing, but I've always enjoyed experimenting and seeing new things. And this sort of fishing, from what little I know about it realistically, it feels like it's one of those things that we tried to do a long time ago, but just to be honest, never really sussed. So we gave up.
Yeah.
So it's nice for me now to see the likes of yourselves having sussed it a little bit. So today I'm obviously keen, hopefully this being part of this an ongoing series where I get to learn a little bit about what you guys, the guys that are good at these things, are doing and how you do it.
Yeah, it'd be a pleasure to show you, mate. You know, and I think you're going to really enjoy it. And I know full well, knowing kind of your local marks, you'll find a place for this in your armoury. No problem.
Let's go have a look at some of the tackle.
Yeah, nice one, man.
So Danny, the tackle for this sort of thing, we'll start with the rods, I suppose, and we'll work our way back from there. So what length, sort of power rating, action are you typically looking for a rod to do this type of fishing, where I assume we're going to be looking for sort of bottom bouncing things and stuff like that? What type of rod suit it?
Yeah, so fairly specialist to this. I would tend to lean more towards shorter rods. So I like the kind of mid sevens to no more than sort of low eights, like those 7.5 to like 8'2". They're the perfect length for this. You don't want massive long rods because, as we've already explained, you're not casting big distances. You're not banging lures miles. You're working it in close. So smaller rods. Actions wise, I like a faster end rod, but you don't want a lightning strike of a rod. You want a nice progressive action that you can. Ultimately, you are fishing under like a tight line when you're dragging back, bouncing back. You want it fast enough to be able to feel the bites, but you don't want it to be overly parabolic where the wind numbs it, you know? So yeah, a faster action rod.
And what sort of casting weights are you typically looking at on these?
Well, a lot of the lures we use are roughly around the 1/2 ounce to 3/4 of an ounce. Now that's not, that is for a purpose, because you are bottom contacting and you want that. You don't want it to be wafting along the mud and you barely get bottom contact. You want to feel it. So those 1/2 ounce to sort of 20, 21 grams are perfect because it allows you to contact them. So around about that sort of weight.
And are there any particular types of lures? I know we've mentioned briefly the the megabass lures have become very popular.
Yeah, megabass, sleeper crawl, and the dark sleeper, they're kind of the granddaddies of this method. The French boys were doing it for a long, long time. They are who inspired us. We bought the dark sleepers, as I said earlier, off of the back of those French boys videos. So yeah, dark sleeper, the sleeper crawl, but any small paddle tails, those 3 and 4 inch baits, maybe even go down to 2, but those around 3 inch baits, as long as it's dark, it looks like, I affectionately named it critter fishing. It doesn't look like anything in particular, but it looks like a lot of things.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Are there any particular colours or anything like that?
I like just darks. I mean, greens, the browns, the blacks. A bit of glitter can help. I find if you've got something on the bottom in dark conditions and just a little fleck of light off the glitter can often create a strike. On the opposite side, I do know guys that have been skull dragging white lures, as everyone fishes white, and they do catch. But for me, I want to match the hatch, so I like the darker lures. Yeah.
And just while we were chatting earlier, actually, I mean, we were talking about the megabass lures and the fact that they're fairly buoyant plastic, so they sit relatively upright, I think. Is that a common feature that you'd like to have throughout the lures you use, or is it just what happens?
I just like that position. I think it's a fantastic way to present a lure. The fish will come up, they're vacuum feeders, they don't have an open mouth and they come and grab, they suck a lure in. So when they're neutral buoyant or wafting, it just creates that defensive profile like a crab or a squat lobster backing off. Or quite often, I know that they eat quite a lot at certain times of the year, baby cuttles, and cuttles will back down in kind of that same sort of presentation. But then again, the paddle tails aren't necessarily buoyant, and you're just swimming them along the bottom. So yeah, it won't harm it. You know?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Joe, with lines then in that case, on to the next step. I mean, what sort of lines are you using? Are you using mostly braided lines? And if you are, what sort of breaking strains or diameters are they typically?
So P rating, 0.8 to 1, covers all bases. I mean, poundage, sort of 12 to 16.
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily go like 20 plus.
Yeah.
I mean, you may be fishing exceptionally rough areas where you need to stop them or they're running over.
I was going to ask about that actually. Yeah, whether you need to go heavy.
Yeah, if you're fishing in proper rough stuff and you need to up your leader length and stronger lines, then absolutely, of course, you don't want to lose fish. But if I can get away with like that, less than P1, sort of 16-ish, I'm happy.
It's always nicer the lighter you can go, isn't it? The lighter you can get away with it.
Yeah, finessing that, because it is ultimately is a finesse method. You know, it's so to be able to having that payoff between the finesse and the balls, because you've seen you are quite often in the bladder. You're on these fish quite hard. You're not messing around with them. You're hitting hold to get them out of sometimes quite rough ground. So. And
what sort of breaking change the leaders then if they're
similar, exactly the same. I mean, I almost exclusively use Roots 8 16-pound. Just that's my go-to. I just love it. That 16-pound. It's a nice subtlety. It isn't too stiff. It isn't too soft. Knots really, really well. It's reliable. When I'm fishing these sort of situations hard, I don't want any failures, and I could trust that. You know. So.
No, I agree on that one. Reels were typically just sort of 2,500, 3,000.
2,500 to 3,000 size. Yeah,
standard sort of bass tackle, isn't it? Really, in that respect.
Yeah, achievable. Most guys have something along these lines in their armory already, you know, just a bit of fine tuning and you've got the gear already. Just a mindset and understanding the ground that you're fishing on. Yeah. Most have this gear already, you know.
Go do it, shall we?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, Dan, we've looked at the tackle. We're on the water. Now that we're here, what are you normally looking for with these sorts of things? Where do you typically fish with these creature bait types of things?
I'm generally looking for real key features, standout features. If you imagine like these mud flats that are behind us, it's pretty barren. There may be the odd crab pot there, here and there, higher.
I thought they were coming down here. Where are we even going to be fishing today?
Yeah, so when the fish are in these systems, what you remember is they're predominantly feeding on crabs, baby flounders in around here. So these features, if you can find a feature in amongst these flats, I've always said, like, if you stick a little tree in the middle of a field with sheep in or cows, they will always gravitate around that little tree. Same principle with the bass. So in a system like we got here, mud flats behind us, some deep gravel runs. There isn't stacks of bladder up at East Devon on these venues, whereas like further down south, there can be bladder polyps and line rocks. We don't have that here, it's mud flats. So what we tend to have here is metalwork, wrecks, old bits of roof tiles where they've been crabbing, and that is where the features are. So what we found here today, we're stood in a bit of a gully now where it's come off of mud flats. It's slightly deeper, firm underfoot, and it's a mixed ground. I'm wanting my lure to look like a little crab. I'm scuttling my lure from feature to feature. Like, so we've got a small bit of trap over here, oyster trap. We've got some tyres, we've got some stone bar in amongst some mud. And I'm gonna be quite short range pitching my lure. I'm not banging it 60 yards. I'm pitching my lure, and I've got a small hole in front of me, I flick my lure out. It's all about bottom contact. So then what I'm doing is I want my lure to visualise my little sleeper crawl as a crab. So it's scuttle, scuttle, stop. It may try and bury itself, scuttle, scuttle. And it's a mixture of that hop, 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 barely any action to the reel, wind down the slack, hop, 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 a pause. Every now and then, just a small drag. So I'll just side drag the rod, just slowly. And that'll scuttle along that sand. And I'm working those features. So if I've got a gully line or a polyp of rocks or weed bar, I will work around those features. Quite often we're very blessed here in South Devon that we've got clear water quite a lot of the time. So it's a visual thing, sunglasses on, and I'm looking for these features, and I am fishing around the features. I'm not just blind casting, I am fishing around features. I'm thinking of a bass, looking for the crabs, and the way I fish the lure is I'm a crab trying to avoid those same bass.
Yeah, right, yeah. And what about tides and things like that? Do you find there's any, not specific to where we are today, but just generally, do you find with these sorts of estuaries that there's any times of days that suit, or does it vary? Yeah?
No, I mean, I catch in night, pitch black at night, I catch in the day. But for me, it's the feature. Some estuaries may have bladder, polyps and lines around the fringes, so you may find it's barren mud or sand. There's going to be much more fish at the top end of the tide when they come up into these bars and up into these features. Or like here, most of the features at the bang ass end of the tide, where you'll have the hour before low, hour after low. So I don't think there's a right or wrong answer with that. You fish to where the features are. Some waters are going to be halfway up the tide, sometimes they're top, sometimes they're bottom. It's purely down to feature finding.
And what about depth of water and things like that? How shallow will they come?
I mean, I catch them in a foot of water. The fish I caught last week, they were all literally, when you struck, they swirled the surface, you know? So I'm sight fishing against features. But then again, there's marks I fish, like here, some of this is sort of chest to 6-7 foot deep. If I know what's underneath it by feeling the bottom, there's no right or wrong with that, the answer to that either. I wouldn't fish mega deep because you start to lose the feel.
Yeah.
If you go down real deep or harsh flow, that does numb it a bit. Even with like P1, P08, you want to be able to feel the contact. The whole point is bottom contact.
Yeah,
I want to feel exactly what I'm doing. Depth of water, I won't shy off deep water, but I do like that kind of.
That makes sense. I like the fact that it's so different to what I'm used to on the open coast, where there's just lots of wide water, etc. It's a really interesting. It sounds a really interesting sort of game where you're obviously looking for features and going for them. So.
I've took a lot of guys out that were die-hard wrasse anglers, super shallow, rough, craggy ground, open coast. It's not dissimilar from that. You're looking for the holes, the gullies, the boulder fields in sort of 5 or 6 foot of water, in the real rough stuff. The mindset to what I'm looking for, how I'm pitching and what I'm looking for, the way the ground is, it's not dissimilar from that, you know? I would prefer to see what I'm fishing in rather than fishing blind, but not to say that blind fishing won't work.
Absolutely, yeah. Amazing. Let's see if we can go catch them.
Yeah, that's it. We've got to the spot bend. Now, as you can see, we've got a bit of metalwork in front of us. The other side of this is quite a deep gully. It's probably double the depth of what we've just waded through. So what we're going to do is we're going to come up along this framework. This is the feature here. We're going to start from the left-hand side. The flow is coming past us, and this is quite slack in here. You have metalwork on the left and a few like polyps of metal and a few spikes and stumps. We're going to methodically work this inside slack, bringing it to us. We don't want to go out too far. We want to kind of stay in amongst the traps, and we're going to work the lures through this inside bar here. And I mean, that's where the fish should hopefully be, you know? So they're coming in here, skulking around. The crabs are crawling in and around the framework, and we're trying to intercept them.
That's good. Let's do it. Let's do it.
So, I've got a really nice drop coming off in front of me where I've got some feature to the left, which obviously as the tide's ebbing out, it's going to be creating, not necessarily a slack, but there is a bit of a more of a duller patch. And within that, the ground's going to change. It's going to be easier for the crabs to hang out round. It's the perfect point for bait fish to hide. So I'm banging the lure out to, not mega far, but far enough. I want to go past it, not land the lure in it. And then I'm working the lure back with a series of, like I say, the hops, the slow retrieve, let it pause. And as that's coming up the ledge, I'm feeling it's all about the feel. is feeling what I'm going over. Now currently it's quite numb out there, so that's that sand, but now I'm starting to feel the plinks. Now that's the rougher ground, and that's exactly what the crabs and crustaceans are going to be hiding in, and I will concentrate on those areas. So I'm happiest when I'm feeling the difference between the transitional difference between the mud, sand, whether that be weed, bladder, or in our case here, stone. And that is a holding area for the fish. So I will work these areas, and if, like we said to Ben earlier on, if we're turning it blind or we don't necessarily know the venue, I will work the lures around these areas to find those transitional periods, whether that be flow creases, old gully holes, or like the obvious features around us, the metalwork, and I will work the lure backwards through those creases, almost cancelling out the sections at a time. And I don't ignore literally to your feet. Quite often I've had fish smash me at my feet, so don't ignore that. And again, I'll bring the lure out. As you can see here, look, I've got a tiny bit of weed here, so I know that I've brought that lure through off of the mud into the stone where the weed is. So for me, I know that's a holding area for bait fish, crabs, whatever they're eating. So that's a good sign. If you're not catching the weed or necessarily snagging, then you're in the wrong place. Again, I just kind of pitch my lure out, feather it down. Don't need to bang it miles. My fishing's here in front of me. As we've previously said, I'm fishing feature lines. So again, I will engage. Probably got 5 or 6 foot in front of me. I engage my lure and I'm just bouncing and hopping it back, waiting for those changes. And when I do feel the changes, I will then zone in on those and just repeat the process.
All right, Dan, we've been fishing for a little bit. What should we be feeling for if a fish actually takes a lure? I assume it's a little bit unlike where I'm on the open coast, where you could almost just be retrieving and all of a sudden whack it's on. Is it different to that? How is this sort of fishing different or similar to the other?
I would say 3/4 of the takes you get crawfish in want to rip your arm off. There's a reason for that, but it's not the be all and end all. You can have where you'll be bringing it back, the slightest little pluck, especially in flow, slightest little pluck, and you think, oh, what was that? And then you've got a fish on. But the vast majority of the time, and it's that not visual, but that feel side of it, I like that with the faster rods, are these just electric wallops that you get. Now that's because if you think about a crab's sharp, got claws, it's gonna have you. Most fish, no fish is gonna want no part of that, doesn't want to get damaged, doesn't want its gills rakers. So I've noticed and I've watched in estuary systems further down, they come up to these crabs and they smash them because they want to disarm the crab, they want to disorient the crabs, rip the legs off, whatever. So very often those takes can be blistering. You think, God, what was that? Because of the way that they want to approach a crab. They're not just coming over and, oh, I'll have that. They need to hit it really, really hard. So very often the takes are explosive. And people will say to me, oh, I think I had a bite. And I will often say, if you had a bite on the craw, you know you've got the bite. There's no like, oh, I think that was a bite. It being a stone or they plinked it over a bit of weed. When they hit, and you'll see in some of the pictures that we put on the line, very often you can only see the very bottom end of the bait where it's so far down because they've just mullered that bait. So yes, you do get those supple takes. You do, absolutely. There's been times where I've just wound in and there was barely a ripple. And I wound in and there's a fish on. I
think that's the thing, coming from a background where I've not done a lot of this type of fishing. I just didn't know what to expect, to be honest.
9 times out of 10, it's going to be an electrifying, proper crack down the rod, which you'll very quickly, if you haven't done much of this, be like, that wasn't the bottom, that was an issue. Quite often you can, and I found as well, they will hold on. You may get that bite and you may not hit that bite. You'll get that bite and you'll quite often be like, oh, I think I had a bite, wind in, and the fish just pulls off. They tend to grab, and I guess it's because of the nature of what they're eating.
That makes sense.
They grab and off they go.
Now we're here, it all makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
And hopefully it happens soon.
We'll
keep on going.
Yeah, hopefully, mate, yeah.
The other thing I think that again, not being massively familiar with the estuaries, I know a lot of people fish a lot more of this style of fishing than I do. With the flow, I mean, here today we've got it running from left to right. Mm-hmm. Where do you typically cast with regards to the flow? If you're casting far enough to be reaching flow, What angles are you aiming?
Yeah, that's a fair question, because presentation is key with this. You don't want that lure ripping through the swimmer naturally. Same with presentation on a lot of lures. If that fish sees the whatever you're presenting at them wrong, like whether it's ripping across the flow, that can quite often spook the fish. So I want that, as I said previously, I want that lure to scuttle and hop like a crab. So I will tend to cast sort of 45 degrees. If it's ebbing or flooding, I tend to be 45 degrees to my position. I'll bang it upflow.
Upstream, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not casting big distances. So within that, if I'm casting upflow and bringing it back towards me, I'm effectively, I'm working the lure back, the slack of the lure back with my rod. I'm just picking up slacked line on my reel.
Yep.
And I'm working that lure back, whether it be the pull or the jerk. So it's constantly coming kind of towards me. I'm not using the reel to reel the lure in.
Yeah.
So and with that, this is a point that I must put out, that it's worth keeping an eye on some brands of reels and some lines are you're constantly winding this under really slack. There's no tension on that line when you bring it back, which can then, if you get a condition like today, it's a bit more breezy, you can get big wind knots. These lures aren't the most castable, arms flailing everywhere, they're not aerodynamic. So a slow lure moving through the air, the line coming off fast off the box can cause these wind tangles. So as I've always said, when you're fishing that towards you, you quite often see me, it may have been caught on camera today, and is when I click the bail arm over and I'll click the bail arm over from a cast, I'll flick it over, I grab the line, and I quite often will pull the line just slightly on the bail like that, and that's to seat that line back on my spool when I start to retrieve again. And that's important. I found that, and I've watched friends get a tangle in a bird's nest in front of them where they're constantly winding that on loose, and because at the end of the cast this line is permanently soft, because it's not under tension. So that is working when you are fishing towards you in flow, and that will be the same in some other methods. Paddle tails down the flow, it is worth, especially with these lures that aren't very aerodynamic, to just make sure that your line is sitting nice and neat on your reel. You don't have a loose loop, because that will just be the tangle the next cast. So, and that is important. And when you got these specifics, sorry to interrupt, you've got these specific small windows of tide, I don't want to be spending 10 minutes sorting out a debacle when I should be on the fish, you know?
That makes sense. And all I was going to add was, you mentioned it briefly then, on what days when there is a bit of a breeze like there is today, are there any particular sort of rod positions? I mean, it might sound a basic thing, but do you prefer to fish with the rod tip up or down, or does it depend on the day?
If you imagine me facing out, I like to fish my rods fairly, I would say 10 to 12, and I like to fish where I'm feeling for the bite, and I'll feel for a bite there. I will then instantly drop the rod just for a split second to then hit the fish.
Yeah, okay.
I just find if I'm down here and there's a lot of line in the flow, or the wind's catching the rod blank here, I just find it can be a little bit numb sometimes. So I like rod tip up. So when I am fishing, my rod tip's not here, I'm not twitching it back. You can absolutely, of course you can fish it that way. I personally, I like a rod up more.
Yeah.
I find that there's less line when I'm fishing close range, there's less line in the water, being caught out by the flow, the breeze. And
I think I've always preferred it up as well in this respect.
So if I feel that dunk, it's a definite dunk. I can definitely feel it. I can just briefly wind down into it and then hit it.
That makes sense. It's good. Let's keep going.
Yeah, no worries.
So we've had a couple of interesting hours on the estuary today with Danny, for which I have to thank very much for his time and showing me exactly what he does in these sorts of situations. I must admit, I almost wasn't expecting the fact that this sort of tactic could be applied to these more sort of broader, bigger estuaries, all this open water. Features there, obviously, but it's opened my eyes as to where we could actually be applying this a little bit more than I ever would have considered. So it's been great. So thank you, Danny.
No worries.
In terms of what we've learned today, I mean, we didn't catch any fish, which is obviously a shame, but we all know that it happens. At the same time, though, it's not really going to be the point of these episodes that we film. It's really a case of just trying, for me, to learn about what some of the guys who I trust to know exactly what they are doing, so they can teach me and hopefully teach some of you as well. So until the next one, we shall see you then.